This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you been thinking about therapy? Have you been trying to get in to see a therapist? Have you found that a lot of therapists that you've been recommended to have either closed books or they've got a really long waiting list? Sometimes months. If you're lucky, it's a couple of weeks. Now, what if there was an alternative that gave you quicker access and at your convenience? So when starting to think about looking for a therapist, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule needs. So just fill out the brief questionnaire and get matched with a registered therapist. You can also switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So get moving with therapy and visit BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/Gunter today will give you 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gunter, GUNTER.
Listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. We had an interesting couple of weeks. Both my wife and I succumbed to the flu, so it's taken a little bit to get over that. But didn't skip a beat with podcasts, did I? So let's tackle today's topic. And I had a request from a listener, female. And her request was, have I got any sort of suggestions for women out there who are trying to improve their relationships with their husbands who sort of rank on the patriarchy scale? Now, interestingly enough, there are several questionnaires that we could actually use to sort of determine to what degree a bloke's patriarchal, right? So I tend not to use them because essentially a lot of times in therapy, some of these things emerge simply through the therapeutic process, and then we can work through it. So there are, however, as I said, some questionnaires that could be used. I don't suggest the layperson to do this because, to me, questionnaires like that, assessment tools, they're really fundamentally based for the use of professionals who are trained. I often do have a problem with, the way that the internet's gone, and especially on YouTube, where if you have these 10 symptoms, you are X. All right. So, for example, the latest thing is, high functioning anxiety. And someone put out a nice little retort to that, which she says in it, high functioning anxiety is not a diagnosis, it's a hashtag. And I'm fully on board with that assessment. Okay. And so that goes for any condition, whether it's autism, ADHD, we can sort of go, do I fit? But the next step should be to speak with your, general practitioner or, make an arrangement to be formally assessed by an expert in the field. Right? Too many times, and I get this from doctors as well. A lot of doctors are telling me that, one of the things that they find irritating in a sense is people coming into their surgery for a consultation and they're telling the doctor what the problem is. Now, I'm the first one to sort of be on board with I need to listen to my patient or my client, and explore their experience. But ultimately, if it comes to a diagnosis, that's in my territory. Now, I'm also a lot of times reluctant to make a diagnosis because there's a whole bunch of variables that come into play with that. So, what's this particular episode of Inspired Change with Gunter really going to be about? Well, fundamentally, it's about that topic of women who find themselves grappling or trying to navigate a relationship with a patriarchal male. Now, patriarchy, whether we're patriarchal or not, is a spectrum thing. You know, to what degree do you exhibit patriarchal characteristics? So, from a making good men great perspective, how territorial are you? How hierarchical are you? How acquisitional are you? How competitive? How combative? You know, are you flexible? To what degree do you have empathy or not? So there's a whole range of factors that come into play with that. So in the sense of, am I dealing with a partner who's patriarchal? So is the bloke who I chose, fundamentally, someone who likes to maintain control over me, someone who often has preconceived ideas about gender roles and so on. And if that doesn't suit me, what do I do? Now, I've got to give allowance to some people whose gender roles are very clearly defined. It's negotiated, both agree on it. And it's not a question of demand and control or coercive control. It's that they've agreed to this. And in today's society, that's perfectly okay. Where it's not okay is when it slips into this idea of coercive control. So, as I said, let's understand that whole thing about patriarchal dynamics a little bit more. So, women, listen up. So, what do I really clearly mean by patriarchal men? Well, these are guys who adhere to very rigid traditional gender roles. Often, believing that men should hold, in essence, authority and power over men. Now, I'm a realist. I don't think there are too many blokes out there, unless we're talking about Harrison Butker, who will put that into the public forum. I don't think there's any bloke who's going to go, yep, I'm better than women, I hold authority over them, and she needs to do as I say. That's not how it works. These things are much, much more subtle, So, at least in most cases, in my experience. However, there are some men who exercise overt dominance or coercive control, and that could be sexually, emotionally, financially, behaviourally. I don't like you talking to that bloke. I think he's cracking onto you. It's not his role to say to you. If he's got a problem with trust, that's his issue. Now, unless you fuel that as a woman by, doing things that he might be sensitive to, that still doesn't mean you need to change it. What it means is that the two of you need to discuss it, right? Now, if my partner has a sensitivity in an area, I'm going to exercise some empathy and some respect and go, okay, I get what you're about. However, I do not accept being, controlled or being told what to do. If you don't trust me, if you don't, feel that you can, accept this in me, then we're not in a relationship together. So one of us is going to need to make the decision that this relationship will not work, and it won't. I can tell you that now. Unfortunately, a lot of women tend to want to make it work. Okay? So it's really important to recognize these patterns, hopefully early on in the relationship, to address them effectively. Unfortunately, most of the time, in my experience, it only really starts to come to a head sometime into the relationship. So understanding these dynamics is going to help you to identify potentially the behaviors that, might begin to undermine your sense of self. Emotionally abusive relationships, and this is what I'm getting to, have an impact on at least one person in an essentially traumatic way where their sense of self diminishes. Okay, so, if you want to talk about diminished self esteem, limited personal growth, but most definitely strained relationships. No one likes to be subjected to that level of, authority and control, especially when, how is it that simply by genetic, accident, I have dominion over you? That's complete nonsense. So, in recognizing the dynamics and fundamentally going, okay, how is this having an impact on my sense of self? And if the answer is yes, it's really the first step towards reclaiming your power. Now, it's not power over him, it's you being more empowered. I get enough guys who are in relationships with women who are overly controlling, disrespectful, or even contemptuous, who make, disparaging marks about the person's masculinity. So, aren't you man enough to do X? That's completely off the charts and unacceptable. So it's a two-way street. So I'm going to be talking to women who are appropriate in their relationship but feel somewhat disempowered or struggling to maintain their sense of self and feel empowered. So one of the most important and effective strategies for women who are in a relationship with someone who's patriarchal is that they need to continue to cultivate a strong sense of self. And that involves clearly understanding your worth. It also involves setting clear boundaries. So it's not just what we talk about, it's how we talk about, and especially from a woman's point, how does he speak with me? Is he, trying to convince me of things? Is he gaslighting me? Is he, putting me down, right? And so it's also then about prioritizing your personal goals and interests. And if he's not into it, at least get some support. I mean, as a partner, as a husband, my role is there to support my wife, my partner, in the things that she is interested in, even if I'm not. Now, that sometimes means I'm not going to participate. Sometimes it's going to be watching things that, she watches when I'm not home and I watch when she's not home. Right? We don't have a problem with that. My preference is, and that's me, I like watching things together. So I don't tend to have a long list of things that I do on my own, really, other than maybe sport, catching up with the guys for some, mutual support and networking. Now, how do you get there? Well, this is where it's really important for women to engage in self-reflection, introspection. Now, it's also useful to engage in some personal development stuff. Okay, it may be going to counselling. But on a very simple level, what about journaling? Maybe joining support groups. These things can help to reinforce your self-esteem, your sense of self-worth, your relationship with yourself, and ultimately your assertiveness, because that's what you're going to need to be in that relationship, and that is assertive. Empowerment starts from within. Power over someone is an externalized behavior, which is in most instances, 99.9% of the time, completely inappropriate. So look at nurturing your inner strength, but also be open for feedback, right? Because it's not just, you and yourself need to actively listen to your partner about, what's going on in this relationship for him as much as for you. So obviously I'm getting to that point where I'm talking about communication techniques, okay? So fundamentally, we need to nurture and work with effective communication. And that's the key to navigating any relationship, especially when we're trying to deal with patriarchal attitudes like control and dominance. So again, I'll come back to that whole idea. What is assertive communication? Well, it starts with I statements. I feel upset when I have my opinion dismissed. And what I'd like from you is X. Now, this is a negotiation standpoint, so it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get what you're asking for, but hopefully you're going to get to a point where there's a clear understanding between the two of you, and you can come to an agreement. And that needs to be done clearly and respectfully. And in some ways with some radical honesty. If you're trying to censor your communication because you don't want to hurt his feelings, you need to rethink that. What is that actually about? All right. Some people are highly empathic and they constantly scanning the other person about whether they're upset or not. Now, my comment is that most patriarchal men are not that highly engaged with worrying about whether they're upsetting you, because it's mostly then about them. And when you confront the person about why is this about you, why is this not about us, it's a question of defensiveness that comes from him. So it might be trying to rationalising their behaviour or their attitude or their beliefs or what they're wanting from you. But the reality is that it's not a communication, it's not assertive, it's not a negotiation. It's not, even sometimes when there needs to be some restorative justice in the relationship, it's not about that. Okay? It's about being firm yet kind. Stand your ground without escalating the conflict. Now, one of the things that I talk about is the whole process of fighting fair. So, firstly, I always treat my partner lovingly, respectfully, and I try to cooperate with my partner. However, I do not accept constant derogatory criticism, disrespect, contempt, defensiveness. I certainly don't accept stonewalling, okay? So there's some behaviours that you need to, check out. Go to the internet and some of the communication sites. There's some really good information on that. Use I statements, as I said before, and that's particularly effective. Although with some more higher up on the scale patriarch, it falls flat on its face because they will throw it back that you're always critical of me. And then the question might be, well, how am I doing that and what could I do differently so you may not feel the need to be so defensive? So it's really an exercise and a work in progress. This is not going to change instantly and immediately. So if you're really, really stuck, look to get some support and to really set some boundaries. Now, it's important that in a support network, whether it's friends, family, or professional counsellors, it's not always about how terrible he is. Because in my experience, most men, even really patriarchal men, have good intentions. It's just that we're socialized into this thing. And most of us, unless we do some real introspection, some, therapy, some counseling, are probably not highly self-aware enough to go, oh, shit, this is what I've done. And then we tend not to want to take accountability for, well, no, she made me do it, or, I was only reacting to her. And so again, this is an ongoing communication process. So, the more you go up the spectrum, the more support you need and the more firm you need to be with setting boundaries. And that includes, the idea of, in our sexual relationship and our affection, right? Again, for a lot of men, affection means it leads to sex. Not everybody. And this is sometimes a mistake a lot of women make, is they think the moment he's being affectionate, it's got to end up in the bedroom or wherever you have sex. That's not the case. It's about checking that out. Be clear, be transparent. If it's not the right time right now, negotiate another time. So that there's some continuity in going from being affectionate to sensual to sexual, and then, nurture the whole relationship. nurturing our empathy with each other, our, acknowledgement and validation of each other, right? A lot of men only hear the negatives, even though you might be throwing some positives into it. I work with enough men who are completely and totally uncomfortable with any form of compliment. A lot of them harbour, internally, especially in their professional roles, a sense of being an imposter. So in their personal relationships, they sometimes go the other way, where they're the knower of everything. It's a defense mechanism. In essence, for most men who've been socialized in the patriarchy, one of our defense mechanisms used to be somewhat narcissistic, and for some men, it goes off the charts. There are lots of men. They disguise it sometimes in flowery words like Harrison Butker. If you think that your partner's life only started when you came into the picture, you are an arrogant son of a bitch. All right? That's just completely off the chart. You should go down on your knee and apologize to her for doing that, not lording it over, a graduation speech into an auditorium of which at least half of the audience are women. So let me just sort of round this off, okay? So in this whole thing, one of the things that you need to do as a female is to clearly define what behaviours are unacceptable, and you need to communicate those boundaries really firmly. Consistency and persistence is a key. If a boundary is crossed, follow through with the consequences that you've set. Now, this might mean taking a step back from the relationship, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently, to reinforce your position. So let me round this off. Navigating a relationship with someone who's patriarchal as a male. There are some patriarchal women, but that's another chapter. It is definitely challenging, but it's not impossible. By understanding, the dynamics, by cultivating self-empowerment, by practicing effective communication and seeking support, women can create healthier, more balanced relationships. But remember, it's got to be a two-way street. You cannot carry a complementary relationship that's based in power on your own. It will wear you down and ultimately, potentially, actually kill you. Remember, you have an absolute right to be respected and valued for who you are. And if that means you want to stay home, take care of the house, look after the kids, that's okay too. But if it means a balanced life of going and sharing home with work, a career, profession, you have a right to be supported in that. So thanks for joining me today. I hope for the person who's made that request, it gives you a better insight, a better idea about how you can hold your ground, how you can, work with a partner who may be, ranging on the patriarchal scale. And, accept this as a journey, not as an outcome. So until next time, stay strong, stay inspired, and continue to advocate for yourself and your well-being, but not at the expense of others. Till the next time. This is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at noirtainment.com.